Reform. Since I am also the head of a political party and PABA is nonpartisan, I will not be moderating today's forum. That's going to be our past president, Kevin Holt. So, as such, the county prosecutor plays an extremely important role in the county, and we should all be looking forward to hearing what they have to say, and be asking them really good questions. Okay. The way that it's going to work, they're each going to get 5 minutes as an introduction. Then we're going to go from introductions into questions. PABA members, you have first shot at asking questions. Each candidate will get a chance to answer each question. They're going to get 3 minutes per question. Then, once they're done with the initial answer, after both of them have answered, if there's a need for a rebuttal, if they want an additional minute, they will each be given an additional minute for a rebuttal. And then after that, we're going to move on to the next question. After that, at the end of it, each candidate is going to be given 3 minutes to wrap up and give us the closing. So there you go. Those are the rules. We're going to try to stick to them. Candidates, if I hold a sign that says 30 seconds, just be mindful of the time, finish your thought, but get ready to wrap up. I will turn, if you want, I'll turn the alarm off. Sometimes it can be funny hearing it. Other times it can be jarring. And I don't, but if you hear the alarm, time's up. Okay, anyway, without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Kevin Holt.
Did we extend?
Huh? Oh, no, but I'm willing to entertain a motion to extend the meeting by up to 15 minutes before we get started. It's been moved by Dick Pilling, seconded by John Fayer. All in favor of extending the meeting up to 15 minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? Alrighty, so I'm going to get to sit down and turn over to Kevin.
And so we'll flip a coin to see who gets to go first. I'll flip a penny here, and you can call it in the air. I'll have candidate Celinda call it in the air for us. Alrighty, and it is heads. So you get to choose, first or second. Thank you. Candidate Mark, please introduce yourself and tell us why you're running.
A little more ladylike.
Test. Can everybody hear me all right? Great. My name is Mark Nichols. I am your current incumbent county prosecuting attorney and ex officio coroner. It's my sincere pleasure to be here with the Port Angeles Business Association this morning. Thank you for hosting today's forum. My journey to become a prosecutor began over 20 years ago when I worked as a U.S. park ranger in a commissioned capacity for the National Park Service. In that capacity, I had the opportunity to investigate crimes ranging from misdemeanors to felony offenses, to make arrests, and to testify in federal court proceedings. And it was that experience that prompted me to go to law school and ultimately become a prosecutor. And I've spent nearly 17 years working in your county prosecuting attorney's office ever since. Initially as a deputy prosecutor in the criminal division prosecuting juvenile respondents for felony and misdemeanor level offenses, subsequently in the felony division working with adult felony offenders. Thereafter, I made a shift to the civil side of the office, and for those of you who don't know, the prosecutor serves, for all intents and purposes, as corporate counsel for county government. I worked as the chief deputy for years, and 4 years ago I was elected to serve as your county prosecutor. I have worked hard to ethically, legally, and responsibly discharge the duties of these two very powerful county government offices. I pledged 4 years ago to promote safety, justice, and service for all of the citizens of Clallam County. And I've delivered on that pledge, starting with felony law and justice. When I took office initially, we were experiencing as a community some challenges in relation to the issue of felony law and justice. Specifically, there had been a past practice in place for some time wherein felony offenses were being downgraded and prosecuted at a misdemeanor level. We immediately ceased and discontinued that practice. I revised the office's charging standards, established some protocols to help streamline how the office functions, and since then we've been able to increase the number of case filings on the felony front by over 10% since I've been in office. Simultaneously and during the same time period, we've reduced the number of cases that were being referred by law enforcement for felony prosecution and declined by over 20%. Ultimately, this speaks to greater accountability for felons in our community. It speaks to a targeted focus on public safety and safer streets in Clallam County. Separate and distinct from that, I've worked as well with victims of crime, and we have a standalone victim witness coordinator position in the office whose sole function is to ensure that crime victims in Clallam County wind up receiving their fair due under the state constitution and Title VII of the RCW. Gone are the days where crime victims learn only after the fact the status of their case, are struggling with how to best address obtaining restitution and dealing with protective orders. We provide relief on all fronts at this point in time. We also work aggressively with community providers to address wraparound services such as interim housing for domestic violence victims while their cases are pending. And last but not least, I've gone above and beyond to work the prosecutor position in a much different way than past prosecutors, specifically by being out and about in the community as frequently as I can be. I make frequent radio appearances, addressing public education and outreach, trying to demystify the operation of the criminal justice system. I've participated in countless neighborhood watch meetings, and I see a number of faces from those meetings present in the group today. Thank you for attending. In addition, I don't just participate within our community. I'm a true believer in trying to promote the broader criminal justice and public safety effort. And to that end, I have for years served as a certified instructor with the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. I also served as a governor appointee to the Forensics Investigation Council, which is charged with overseeing the work of the State Patrol Crime Lab. I believe that Clallam County has the opportunity to advance public safety's interest across the state, not just within Clallam County. I've worked towards that end during my first term in office, and I look forward to continuing that work in a second term, focusing primarily on aggressive prosecution of the most violent offenders in our community who predate on the most vulnerable, addressing the need of mental health court. We have a criminal justice system which does a fair job of addressing the needs of straight criminal offenders, but it does not do a very good job at all of addressing the needs of those who are mentally ill. And last but not least, I look forward to working with the coroner's office to advance discussion of critical and important public safety issues such as suicide, overdose, and accidental death in our community. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candidate Mark and Candidate Celinda.
Do I push buttons here?
No, just hold up here.
Very close. Can everybody, can you all hear me?
Mike's not on.
Hello?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's an honor to be here. It's and a pleasure. Thank you. I've lived in Clallam County since 1995, early 95. I came here to hang out my own shingle as an attorney in private practice and to raise my son. For the first 6-7 years, I was a lawyer in private practice, represented many hundreds of individuals, private clients, as well as court-appointed clients in all of our courts, juvenile court, district court, family court, superior court, even the lower tribal court. Then I ran for elected office. I've ran for elected office 3 times. You voted me in 3 times, so I'm 3 for 3. So this is my 4th time that I'm running, and I very much hope that you will continue my winning streak here. For the last 7 years, as you know, I've been the Clallam until I vacated the position last year. I served as the Clallam County Treasurer for 7 years, successfully turned over almost $100 million of your taxpayer funds, safe and liquid, in the Treasury. Now, I have a long history, as you can see from my brochure, I have a long history of defending your rights, defending the rights of those people to have access to justice, to defend your rights as taxpayers. Over and over again, I have appeared at the Commissioner's office advocating for your rights, your tax dollars, ensuring that everybody pays their fair share. One of my concerns with the current state of affairs is that not everybody is paying their fair share. That is one of the things I want to address. And the peer program in district court, there was a vigorous collection of fines from those who are least able to pay, actually, and that course of events was determined to be, they changed the law, but it was also looking to be unconstitutional. I want to make sure everybody pays their fair shares. There's a large stack of uncollected interlocal agreements and franchise agreements that haven't been collected since way before I became treasurer, that have just been sitting on the books. Now, why is it that those who can certainly afford to pay aren't paying? All of you are making up that difference. So that's one of the things that I want to do. Other ways I would like to ensure people are paying their fair share. I want to address the cost of the current prosecuting attorney. In addition to, as I pointed out, he's had, in my brochure, there's a $1.6 million judgment against him. There was a $500,000, okay, the $1.6 million was for an age and gender discrimination lawsuit against him for how he treated women in his office. There was over $500,000 spent on the public records case in which he was named defendant. There's a current case pending where that alleges he harassed his office manager. But beyond that, I would like to point out that in the last 4 years, staffing levels in this office have increased from 14 to 24. What are all of these people doing? 10 more people in this office. Another thing I would like to point out is that in another office under the line of risk management, there are now 4 people where there used to be none. Now, 3 of these people are civil investigators. Now, this is something that very much concerns me, because I know for a fact, for instance, that there is a civil investigation report that has my name at the top, and then it's all redacted. That really concerns me. It should concern you, because I would like to think that these 3 people, civil investigators, aren't only investigating me. So who are they investigating? Whose name is at the top of these investigations? Then, of course, there are all these other private lawyers that are also servicing as deputy prosecutors that you never hear about. The likes of Bill Kammerer, who is a deputy prosecutor. Tens of thousands of dollars are being spent on private lawyers in Olympia to do what? Exactly at the seat, behind the scenes. Some of those bills, again, have my name on it. They're redacted. I have no idea what they did. This should concern you. These are my rights that are being violated, but if my rights are being violated, then you cannot be sure that your rights aren't. I'm a big believer in equal justice. That's what my hat is. Equal justice. It isn't justice unless it's equal. And that is my goal for the office, is to protect your rights. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, candidate. And so now we come to one of the many great benefits of being a member of the Port Angeles Business Association. Members may ask questions of our candidates. May we have our first question, please? What a bashful bunch. There we go. Yes, Brian.
Yes, this is to the Sylvia.
Celinda.
Based upon the fact that your last position, you left early without completing your term, you're asking for our support as voters. How do we know that you'll complete your term this time?
The reason that I left my term is that I found myself in an impossible and unacceptable position of having to choose between, either I was asked repeatedly to disperse funds that in violation of my oath of office, contrary to the rule of law, or that my choice was either you release these funds or you're going to get sued. To personally defend those rights, I was not in a position to personally defend the rule of law, my duty to safeguard your funds until dispersed according to law. As prosecutor, I will be in a position to protect those rights. I will be in a position to ensure funds stay in the Treasury until all of the I's and have been dotted and T's have been crossed. One of the things that I want to point out is the quote on my brochure. In 2015, I was forced ultimately to release $1.3 million without proper legislative authority. At the time, Prosecutor Nichols stated in his legal opinion that I am an ardent champion of the right of taxpayers to participate in the budget process. Yet he then set me up for a lawsuit to release those funds based on an administrative loophole. That's what I was forced to release $1.3 million based on an administrative loophole. One of the things about rights is you will not find them in administrative policies. There are no rights. You don't have any rights in administrative policies. I was defending the rule of law. Your rights are, as taxpayers, are located in statutes and in the Constitution. Those are the ones that I was citing. That's where, frankly, my personal liability as treasurer is located. As treasurer, you got personal liability all over the law if you release funds without proper legislative authority, without those pieces of paperwork. Now, all of you, I'd like to think, would like the treasurer to keep the money in the treasury until we have that piece of document that says, the right piece of document that says, okay, go ahead and release it. Those are the rights that I was defending, your taxpayer rights. And for that, I was set up with a lawsuit to release them in based on a loophole. So I'm the candidate that the incumbent acknowledges as a champion of your rights. Mr. Nichols here is a champion of administrative loopholes.
Thank you, Celinda. And candidate Mark, will you finish your term if you are elected?
Stand up.
Yes, in short. So I look forward to the opportunity to complete my first term in office. It's been a pleasure to have the opportunity to serve the citizens of Clallam County. Not each day is easy as an elected official. There's stress, there's conflict, there's competing interests that need to be weighed on a daily basis. I very much enjoy rising to that challenge. Even after the toughest days, I become more and more motivated to come back the next day in turn. And just by way of brief response to a couple of the remarks made, I don't set people up for lawsuits at all. Frankly, we're in the business of trying to avoid them whenever possible and resolve conflicts through more civil means. And so I'll simply leave that on the record, but I look forward to completing my first term. I've always followed through with my assignments and don't plan on changing that, so you can count on me in that regard.
And candidate Celinda, do you have a response for that?
I was your treasurer for 7 years. Before that, I was in the county courthouse for another 7 years. I worked for the county for 14 years. And I worked very hard all of those years. During the 7 years as treasurer, I didn't take any vacation. I've never had an opportunity to take any time out. Every single day, I had to be there to make sure your money was kept safe. The key to health is you basically have a choice at any given time to try and change the situation. If you find yourself in a tough situation, to try to change it. If you can't change it, then you have two choices. You can either accept the situation or remove yourself. I was not willing to accept and continue to be part of what I felt was a very not a good situation. So that left me with the only choice to remove myself. As a prosecutor, I will be in a position to change the situation. This is why I'm running for prosecutor, because I desperately would like to see change happen. I would like to move forward in good faith and work on change. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Celinda. Any comment from you, candidate Mark, for this last question?
No, I think I'm ready.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from member Debbie.
In the light of the shortfall that the county is looking at because the pay and appear has gone away, how do you justify having 10 more people in your office over, based on Celinda's comments? You said there's now 24 in your office when there should be 14 or something like that. And what is the budgeted amount for the additional staff?
So that's a question for candidate Mark. Great, thank you.
Did everybody hear the question? It has to do with essentially how can I justify having growth that's occurred in the county prosecuting attorney's office and it also delved into funding sources essentially. And so there has been growth that's occurred within your county prosecuting attorney's office for a couple of different reasons. When I first came into office, going back to my earlier remark about revisiting how felony law and justice was functioning in Collin County, I met with the County Board of Commissioners in open meeting and lobbied them to restore funding for a previous felony trial deputy position that had been allowed to lapse through attrition. The board responded to the rationale I presented, funded that position, and it's due in no small part to the existence of that position that we've been able to get felony law and justice back on track, which is important because only the county prosecutor has authority to prosecute felonies in Collin County, and the community relies upon the office for that purpose. Separate and distinct from that position, there's been growth that's occurred through the consolidation effort, which I think I've shared with this group before. And by that I refer to the process of the cities of Port Angeles and Sequim contracting with the county for municipal court services, prosecution services included. And so we picked up 2 additional deputy prosecutors through that process, 2 additional support staff as well. The salaries and benefits for those positions are in large part offset by the cities through the contractual arrangement that the county has with them. And so that's an example of how growth has occurred, but it's also simultaneously being offset through money coming in. There are other positions within the office that are partially grant funded as well. A good example is our victim witness coordinator. Virtually all of the salary and benefits for that position come from grants that come down from the state of Washington. The growth that's occurred in the county prosecutor's office, I think, is important to underscore, occurs in connection with the public safety effort. That's important because public safety, frankly, is the core function of county government. We exist for other purposes, to build and maintain roads, for example, to conduct elections at the local level, but public safety is the core function of local government. And so I'm not going to apologize for the growth that's occurred within the office. I think it's occurred for good purpose. I'm mindful of expenditures, don't believe in spending money that we don't have. And as things develop and we look at the county's financial situation, I'm sensitive to the fact that counties operate at a field disadvantage as to cities and state government in Washington, and look forward to meaningfully dialoguing with the county commissioners about any possible need for change that's occurring. But again, it's been for good reason thus far, and it's allowed us to realize good results for the community on the public safety front.
Thank you, Mark. And candidate Celinda, your comments on staffing and budget for the prosecutor's office.
Thank you. The 24 staff members currently in the prosecuting attorney's office excludes actually the grant-funded position of local crime victim. That position is actually in addition to the 24, so we add that, and that's 25. Then there is an additional deputy prosecutor now in the risk management, under the risk management line, who is in the basement on public records. So that actually brings it to 26. Then there are deputy prosecutor appointments, people like Dale Cameron, who is in Olympia, also being paid for. All of these positions are being paid for by the 24 that I quoted, are all being paid for with the general fund. The crime victims, like I said, are separate. The risk management is paid for by the general funds, that's 25. Bill Cameron is paid for by general fund. Duncan Phobes, another special deputy prosecuting attorney, and who knows what they're all doing behind the scenes, paid for by general funds. When the consolidation happened, the misdemeanor contracts consolidation happened in late 2015, I actually raised a lot of concerns. I have a lot of emails saying, hey, the math doesn't add up. This doesn't make sense. This is going to cost the county money. And I got no traction with those comments. But I called it from the very beginning that these contracts don't make financial sense. So I can understand why they should be revisited at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Celinda. And candidate Mark, response.
Only in relation to the mention of some folks who are serving as special deputy prosecuting attorneys, and that's based on my designation, but they're not being paid for by or through the prosecutor's office budget. There's been a reference to a gentleman by the name of Dale Kammerer, another person by the name of Duncan Foes. These are people who are brought in by the county's insurer to conduct what are called pre-defense reviews. This is a normal, standard business practice. It's employed by counties and cities across the state. And so that there's an issue of liability that confronts the county, and it's covered by insurance, the insurance company will bring in someone to perform that review. My standard course of business is to confer what's called a special deputy appointment upon them so that we can monitor in part the work that they're doing, as well as the billing rates to make sure that they're not overbilling the county. So to the extent those individuals are being included in numbers, it's really an artificial inflation as to growth that's occurred within the office. There has been some, for sure, but not to the magnitude that's being presented, and perhaps not for the purposes being expressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Mark. And Candidate Celinda, any further comments?
Well, these individuals, Duncan Forbes was involved in the Lang settlement, so that was more than pre-litigation review. That was at the time that the Lang case was being settled. That Lang case named the prosecuting attorney's office as a named defendant, yet the defendants were themselves involved in settling the case, which is a giant conflict of interest, by the way. Duncan Forbes also was involved in actual lawsuits, not just pre-defense. So again, the prosecutors' costs have been significant over the last few years for civil investigations, public records, risk pool, private lawyers, staff levels, judgments, and on it goes. Millions and millions of dollars. This is one of the things I want to address as your prosecutor. I want this hemorrhaging of public funds from the prosecuting office to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Celinda. And we have a question. We have two questions. I saw this one first, and then we'll get to this young lady over here. So, please.
My question is to Mark, and in Ms. Barkow's original opening remarks, she said that you had sued her several times. And can you explain that to me? And I believe one of them had to do with public records PPM. I don't understand why there would be a suit from that.
Did everyone hear the question?
No.
All right. It related to a claim that I sued Ms. Barkhouse, and a specific reference was made to a public records suit involving the Peninsula Daily News. And so, by way of background, I'm glad you asked that question. There's actually been a fair amount of mischaracterization and quite a bit of misinformation about that suit. That suit was about transparency and the requirement for government to be transparent. Clallam County found itself in a situation where the Peninsula Daily News had submitted a Public Records Act request to Clallam County, seeking all communications between Ms. Barkhouse and Mr. Wilson, who's filming today, I would note, either on her official work email address and or communications that were of a work nature but contained on her personal email accounts. And so the state Supreme Court had provided us guidance, fortunately, with regards to our organizational obligations in responding to this Public Records Act request. Specifically in the case of Nissen versus Pierce County, wherein the county prosecutor there refused to turn over text messages, the issue wound up being litigated of whether an elected official could prevent the public from having access to work communications simply by maintaining them on a personal email account. For reasons that frankly comport with common sense, the Supreme Court concluded no. Especially with elected officials, if you're going to be serving the public, you cannot shield them from access to your work communications simply by transacting communication on your personal email account as compared to your work system or email account. And so for that reason, we found ourselves in a situation where, notwithstanding our request for Ms. Barkhouse to follow the clear guidance from the state Supreme Court and producing the records to the county so we could in turn turn them over to the news media, the PDN, and for those records that were not being turned over, provide a simple affidavit. There was a refusal. The commissioners ultimately authorized a lawsuit to be filed. It was not a suit in the traditional sense, in that we weren't simply seeking money, for example, but instead guidance from a Superior Court judge regarding whether the county had done enough to discharge its duties under the law, and on a separate issue, whether the treasurer should be ordered to turn over records in her possession. At the end of the process, the commissioners requested that the same suit they authorized be dismissed, which I quickly complied with at their request. The treasurer wound up doing in the end exactly what we had requested that she did in the beginning, and wound up turning over the communications to the county so we could in turn turn them over to the PDN. She also turned over what we call a missing affidavit. It's unfortunate that the matter had to get to the point of litigation, but that's the backstory on that matter.
Thank you, candidate Mark. Candidate Celinda, your response?
Well, this is a typical court case situation where there's two scenarios of the facts. The way that I experienced this situation is that on January 2016, I was named Person of the Year by the protocol for my whistleblowing. 3 months later, I was personally served by a sheriff's deputy in my office with a lawsuit, 102 pages, that asked for personal liability for my supposed refusal to respond to this public records request, which is absolutely not the case. I had sent emails I was writing articles for the protocol, absolutely, because I was getting no traction getting my concerns out via the Peninsula Daily News. So I was writing articles for the protocol, and yes, I was using my personal email to write or to communicate with the protocol because I felt these articles could be construed to be political in nature, and as such, I would have gotten in trouble if I had used my business email. The emails that I ended up turning over were 6 of them. They are attached to the Nissen affidavit, which you will find on the website. I think you should read that affidavit. It's very interesting how exactly all of this went about. It should be noted that at the same time that Prosecutor Nichols was suing me over political emails sent from my personal account, he was in the middle of settling the delaying public records request case where he was a defendant. My perspective of this whole sort of affair is that they were setting it up to make it sound like I would be the one that was responsible for this $500,000 judgment that was ultimately paid out. Here's a lawsuit, Clallam County versus Barkhouse, $500,000 leaves the building. Gee, you can. So in any event, I would encourage you to read that Nissen affidavit. It is on the website. It tells the story. But again, I was named Person of the Year for whistleblowing, and then I got sued. And that really did put, it stopped me from further whistleblowing because I realized, what else are they going to do to me? What are they going to do to me next? I want to, as prosecutor, get to the bottom of how the county administers lawsuits, how the county, handles risk management issues, the relationship between the county and the Washington County risk management pool. One of the things I want to point out about that is that the risk pool does not cover public records request judgments. That's why that $500,000 was paid for by your tax dollar reserves. But on the other hand, a lawyer from the risk pool was involved in suing me, assisting Mark Nichols in that lawsuit. Apparently, there were actually 5 lawyers involved in suing me with that lawsuit. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Celinda. Response, Mark?
Just insofar as, again, this was a suit about transparency, and state law is clear that elected officials, above all organizational employees, cannot shield their communications from public access simply by parking them on a personally owned cell phone or a personally owned email account. Moreover, as conceded by Ms. Barkhouse, the suit was filed by Clallam County against her, not by myself against her. It's true the prosecutor represents the county and signs off on pleadings, as any attorney would, as you can imagine. That does not mean that the attorney is the person initiating the lawsuit per se, authorizing it or directing it otherwise. Again, it was Clallam County versus Miss Barkow based on a refusal to turn over records that the public had a clear right to access and ultimately was able to access.
Thank you, Candidate Mark. And Candidate Linda, any further comment?
My comment at the time was, well, if these articles and my communications with Bill Wilson are considered public records, then these articles should be posted on the county website. That hasn't happened yet. So you can't have it both. I mean, if they're public records, then post the articles. If they're not, then my communications about them aren't public records. But all the communications between me and Mr. Wilson were about word counts, suggestions for some edits. They were not public records. No county business, no treasurer's business was conducted between me and Mr. Wilson via my personal emails. Public business, public records have a distinct definition. Communicating with a publisher about articles, no. So, but again, we could talk about this one forever, but it cost the county $500,000 to settle the Lane public records case, which alleged that Mr. Nichols for years withheld relevant public records from Mr. Lane.
Thank you, Candidate Linda. And we had a question over here first. Yes, young lady.
Good morning. Something that's really important to me as a voter is the advocacy and prosecution of crimes against children. So I was hoping, Mark, that you could share what your record has been over the past 4 years, and then for your term, and Celinda, what is your experience in advocacy and prosecution of crimes against children, and what would that look like?
Thank you. Candidate Mark.
Did everyone hear the question? All right, it had to do with advocacy in relation to crimes perpetrated against children. And so I've been asked to address my record in that regard during my first several years in office. And so I am pleased to say that advocating for children's rights has been one of the premier priorities of my administration. You need look no further than the prosecutor's website. Look at the press release text box, and you'll find no less than a dozen press releases going back over the last several years that chronicle victories in high-profile cases in which there were child victims. This is a very, very important issue to me. Children are among the most vulnerable within our community. Our experience leads us to believe that there's probably far more crime being perpetrated against them than society is aware of. And I speak not only to some of the more unpleasant sex offenses that we hear about in the newspaper, child rape and child molestation, but also human trafficking, which is something that occurs in Washington state at a much higher rate than people realize. We're actually 13th in the nation, based on an article that came out in the Seattle Times yesterday in the area of human trafficking. Clallam County happens to be located geographically in an area that makes it stand out to many with expertise in the subject matter as a jurisdiction that likely has a much higher degree of human trafficking than we learn about. So these are cases that we prosecute aggressively, not only working within our office on the legal front, but we work with community stakeholders such as Healthy Families of Clallam County, Forks Abuse. We work actively with the Child Advocacy Center, with local law enforcement. We've become more sophisticated in our investigation of crimes involving child victims. We've become more caring, frankly. We've delved into the psychology of victimology for children as compared to adults. And I like to think that we've made tremendous strides in that area and realized a host of victories for the community and ultimately kept many, many children safe and removed them from harm's way in the process.
Thank you, Candidate Mark. Candidate Celinda, your response?
Thank you. Well, when I was in private practice for 7 years, I represented a lot of children. Actually, as a court-appointed attorney, well, I had a share of the dependency contracts. I was in Juvie Hall every Thursday, juvenile court every Thursday, and a lot of my court-appointed clients were children whose parental rights had been terminated. I was their in loco parente, as they call it. I was the only one left to advocate for them. And I vigorously advocated on behalf of these children. It was actually well, I ended up adopting one of my clients straight out of GB Hall at that time, 16-year-old girl. One of the things I would like to point out at this point is that Prosecutor Nichols, during his first 4 years or this term, has not carried any caseload whatsoever. He's a prosecutor who doesn't prosecute. He's a prosecutor who administers. I intend to assume the caseload from the first day that I take office to prosecute and defend the most vulnerable among us. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Celinda. And Candidate Mark, your response?
So in today's day and age, it turns out the job of prosecutor has become fairly complicated. It's not the position that it used to be 2 or 3 decades ago. The legislature's been active in handing down unfunded mandates, increasing the scope of duties for county government, the workload for prosecutors. Again, we represent the state of Washington in criminal proceedings, and we serve as corporate counsel for county government. We also attend to a host of other functions in advising school districts, providing advisory opinion for boards, commissions, and the like. It's true that I've not been able to carry a caseload during my first term. It's something I hope and look forward to doing at least on a part-time basis, realistically, in my second term. The reason for that is that we've got a large office. I have learned that it pays attention, or it pays off to pay attention to your people, to keep your workforce well-trained, to keep them happy, to keep them mentally and physically healthy. And that's important when you look at the work of prosecutors. We deal with some pretty toxic subject matter. It all translates to higher morale, and that's where I've been devoting my time. If I made a decision to spend my time in the courtroom, it'd be at the expense of the people and my outreach to the community.
Thank you, Candidate Mark. And Candidate Celinda, your response.
Well, I would just say that the incumbent has time, of course, during the last 4 years, for the first 2 years of his elected office, to pursue his office manager, which he doesn't deny. He has had time to settle a case in which he was a named defendant for the public request in Lane, which took many, many months and many, many lawyers, and he had time for that. I think it is time that we have a prosecutor who prosecutes. I promise to prosecute the most vulnerable among us. I promise to be in the courtroom. I think it is very important for the prosecutor to spend his time in the courtroom to see how his deputies are doing their job, and to make sure that he. You need a prosecutor that prosecutes. If a prosecutor isn't in the courtroom, then what is exactly? That's what I intend to do.
Thank you, Candidate Celinda. And Member George has a question for us today.
As reported in PDN as well as other media sources, we have obviously some sort of drug problems. Most of them end up being West End drug problems. But could I have both of your candidates' opinions on what your office would do in the next 4 years with not only opioid crisis, but with other drug issues?
Drug issues. And Candidate Celinda, would you go first?
Obviously, this is not going to be an easy fix. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take probably some money. One of the reasons I want to take a look at the prosecutor's budget, see what these people are doing, see where all the money is going, is to free up those people, to free up that money, so we can start looking at these real tough issues that are facing our community. And that is what I will be doing, rather than settling cases that aren't. I have no liabilities hanging around me. I will not have to spend my time trying to figure out how to get things settled that might have happened in the past. I will be able to, from the get-go, start addressing these very serious issues that are facing our community, and that and to start repurposing some of these funds and these people that are now doing other things. Thank you.
And Candidate Mark, drug issues for Clallam County.
So you've got a devoted team of public servants who focus aggressively on prosecuting drug offenses, from recreational users in the street, certainly to dealers across the county. You know, when I first came to Clallam County, the drug of choice was methamphetamine. It was being cooked in the woods here. This is a national epidemic at the time. Over the course of time, methamphetamine fell slightly by the wayside and became overshadowed by heroin, which has a lower cost point, and so it's become the drug of choice now. We've all heard about the terrible journey that people travel from oftentimes being prescribed legitimate painkillers to running out of their refills, to turning to the black market, and then ultimately becoming hooked on heroin. It's an all too common story in Clallam County. Not just in the West End, but in Central and East County as well. It strikes everyone across the political, socioeconomic spectrum. And so we address it by prosecuting people. The reason we prosecute them is to get them into the system. The reason you get them into the system is to get them some help. That takes the form of programs like drug court. I'm an ardent supporter of drug court. I believe at last check that our drug court population, as it were, is near to an all-time high, which means we're making good use of that program, which isn't designed to simply punish, but it's really designed to allow people to get a better handle on the underlying problem that's driving their criminal behavior. The goal being to help them into recovery so they start leading productive lives in our community. In relation to folks who are dealers, they don't come into drug court. That's my policy. They're bringing poison into our communities and they need to go to jail or they need to go to prison. And that's not easy to realize in Clallam County or the state of Washington, given the direction in which our laws are traveling, but it's an important outcome nonetheless to remove those people from our community. Their influence is nefarious, it's terrible, and it destroys families. And so that's how we choose to deal with drug addiction issues in the prosecutor's office. I'm also very active on the coroner front in advancing the public health discussion addressing overdose rates. Many of you may have heard that heading into 2016, in particular, I think Clallam County had the third highest overdose rate in the state. We saw fit to have our county health officer declare opioid overdose as a public health crisis and a reportable condition. Through the use of compounds such as Suboxone and Naloxone, we've been able to turn around that overdose rate. We still have it occurring at a lesser level, and notably the drug that's responsible for most of the deaths now in Clallam County is methamphetamine, leading us to believe that we can't forget about it. It's still there, and what we're learning is that most people who use heroin are also methamphetamine users.
Thank you, Candidate Mark. Candidate Salinda, your response. Thank you very much. And so we have a question from Member Carol Johnson.
I'm going back to the public's record issue. It came up in our state legislature this past year relative to their rules to public disclosure and public records. Could both candidates please address the impact of that public records issue on private citizens that serve on county boards and how they're impacted by that rule as well?
Thank you. Candidate Salinda, will have you go first this time.
Anybody who participates in the conduct of public business is subject to the rules of public records, and one of the first things that happens is that there is a training for people who are involved in. To be honest with you, I haven't paid too much attention to that particular aspect that happened this year. I've been working on some other things. I'm currently not a public official, and so earlier this year I've spent time being a personal citizen, so I have not quite followed that particular rule that has. I've noticed that something was going on in the legislature, and obviously when I'm back into public service, I will carefully take a look at how things might have changed, but I'm not ready at this point to address that specific question of how exactly any change in the legislature impacts private citizens who are participating. So I'm sorry about that. But
my focus would be more on the public records relative to citizens serving on county boards.
Public records that are created by the county that are impacting people that are serving on boards. Well,
how the Public Records Act impacts citizens serving on
yes.
county boards.
Yes, and they are subject to those rules. I do know that. You're subject, if you're on public boards, then if you're conducting business. When I was on the Charter Review Commission, we were all explained that it's best to have a separate email address for anything that is associated with what you're doing with the county. So that would be my answer right now, until I get an opportunity to take a look at how that law might have changed. But if you are participating in any sort of public activity in the Citizens Board, but for the county, then my recommendation would be is to have a separate email address for those activities. So if there's a public records request, it'd be easy to submit them.
Thank you, Candidate Linda and Candidate Mark.
So I think the discussion that's occurred at the state legislative level has really sensitized the citizens of the state of Washington to the long-arm reach of the state's Public Records Act. The answer to your question is that the Public Records Act does apply to boards and commissions. And so for citizens who opt to serve through local government on a board or committee, regardless of whether you're compensated financially or not, you should expect that your work-related communications, that is communications that bear on the work of that board or committee, are going to be subject to the long-arm reach of the state's Public Records Act. Ms. Barkhouse mentioned the concept of having a separate email that would be maintained, say, on the county system through our server for people who participate on boards and committees, so you can keep your committee communications separate and distinct from your personal email account. That's advisable. One of the areas where the county stands to improve, and I've been harping on this for over a decade, frankly, has to do with boards and committees. And so I'm really grateful that you've raised this issue. We have all manner of boards and committees in Clallam County government. They're created by the county legislative authority. Some of them exist by operation of statute, and they're required to exist. Where the areas that we've fallen short, I believe, is in educating boards and committee members as to the obligation to comply with the Public Records Act on the one hand, and in many circumstances, they also need to be aware of the obligation to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act as they go about meeting with one another to discuss certain measures of county business. And so this goes back to the core discussion regarding transparency, the public's right to know what not only their elected officials, but their compensated organizational employees and even volunteer boards and committees are doing in relation to the work of government. Does that answer your question, Carol?
And Candidate Linda, a follow-up.
And I want to point out that is exactly this situation where maybe you are a citizen on a board that is a public board, that you too could be served by a sheriff's deputy with a lawsuit if you don't jump the hoops when there is a public records request. And that should really concern you, because a public records request, the way it was handled against me, they went from 0 to 120 miles an hour in a matter of days. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody in this room who serves on a public board. And that is why I'm saying, why I'm wearing my hat. Equal justice isn't justice unless it's equal. When you start messing with the rights of one, you're messing with the rights of everybody. So I got sued by my own county for public records, or supposed public records. There weren't no public records, they were political emails on my personal email address. It happened to me, it can happen to you.
Thank you, Candidate Linda. Candidate Mark, any further comments?
Just a brief rebuttal. Any county employee who refuses to comply with the Public Records Act is going to create a liability that attaches to the county and the public fisc by implication. The county would proceed in the same way it did with Ms. Barkhouse with any employee who refused to follow the law. And so, fortunately, we have clear guidance from our courts regarding the obligation of public employees to turn over public records. This is the business of the people we're talking about here. And so we don't have the luxury of simply saying, go away, I don't want to turn over records, I'm not going to show them to you. Part and parcel of working in government, regardless of whether it's the state government, county government, or city government, is the obligation to comply with our state's Public Records Act. This is something the county takes very seriously and for very good reason, given the attendant liabilities if you're found to have violated the same. And again, those liabilities attach as to the organization and as to the public fisc, so the county really needs to be in charge of shepherding compliance.
Thank you, candidate Mark. And we have our PUD commissioner to ask a question.
Part of your office duties are to act as coroner as well as a prosecutor. Is there potential for conflict in that position? And if there is, how would you handle that?
So the question is, you are serving as both prosecutor and coroner. Do you see conflicts in that? And we had Celinda go first last time, so we'll have candidate Mark go first this time.
Because I've got a few minutes, and just by way of brief background, I'll just note that Clallam County is a bit of an outlier in the state of Washington insofar as we are the largest county by population. We have a population of about 74,000 people that still has the elected prosecutor serving as the ex officio coroner. We say ex officio because we mean by virtue of holding one office, you're obligated to discharge the duties of the other. Coroners are responsible for determining manner and cause of death as their chief function, as it were. And there is the potential for conflicts to exist. And so for years and years, when I've gone to, say, for example, homicide scenes, I'm very careful to bring with me another deputy from the office. And what we do is to bifurcate functions on scene. So one of us serves in the capacity of the coroner, discharging that set of duties. The other can be on scene in the capacity of a prosecutor representative to work with law enforcement. It pays to keep those two roles separate so you don't wind up creating a conflict of interest, especially one that could be imputed to the office as a whole. That would be to the detriment of the community. We might have to bring in an outside county prosecutor to handle one of our homicide cases, which is something that I personally would avoid at all costs. And so that's a bit about the work of the coroner in relation to that of the prosecutor. The two functions, they again coexist within the prosecutor's office. In any other county our size, there'd actually be a separate, standalone, independent elected coroner. Clallam County, through its home rule charter, has opted to keep the two functions attached to one another, by and large, as a cost-saving measure. And the reason I say that is because in our charter it states that the prosecutor shall serve as the ex officio coroner at no additional compensation. Practically speaking, the men and women of the prosecutor's office discharge the coroner duties. There is some savings, I suppose you can say, in that if you look at other similar-sized rural counties and the operating budget for their elected coroner's office, you'll see offices that cost anywhere from $120 and change all the way up to about $380,000 or so per year by way of annual operating budget. We don't complain about doing the work. I actually really find the coroner work gratifying. Reason being, even though we're all different, we're all the same because we're born and we die. And I believe if you can play a role in either one of those processes and make it better for the family, to help demystify the grief process, to help them through that, that's really an honor and a privilege, and it's work that I appreciate doing.
Thank you, candidate Nichols. Candidate Celinda.
I do think that there is a potential for conflict between having the same person or office handle the coroner duties and the prosecution duties, because the coroner duty is one of fact-finding, what happened here, and then the same person, the same office, prosecutes on those facts. So I do think that there is a potential for conflict there. I would propose to the next Charter Review Commission that they consider that issue, as well as the issue of whether the prosecuting attorney's office should remain partisan or should become nonpartisan. As you know, I am running for this position as an independent because I believe that the prosecuting position should be independent, decision should be made independent of party affiliation. There was no Republican or Democrat way of collecting taxes. I don't think there is a Republican or Democrat way of prosecuting offenses. I feel very strongly about that. I think the prosecutor should remain independent of any loyalties to any other groups should be in independent positions. So, but back to the coroner, I think there is a potential for conflict. And it's something I would like to see addressed with the Charter Review Commission next time. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Celinda. Further comments, candidate Mark?
Just in relation to the separate issue of the Office of County Prosecutor remaining as one of the two partisan offices in the county, I've been very clear about this when I ran for office 4 years ago, and I'll continue in my statement that the last thing you want is a partisan prosecutor. I do not discharge the duties of the office in a partisan fashion. Frankly, the matters that come across my desk are bipartisan in nature. Think of potholes, nobody likes them, everybody wants them filled. The same can be said for crime. Nobody likes it, they want it stopped, they want a safe community. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, Constitutionalist, Libertarian, or Green Party member. These are common issues of local concern. That's what we focus on in your county prosecutor's office. Simply as an aside, I would note that one of our internal jokes stems from the fact that the majority of the DPAs, not that I asked them, have shared with me their political ideology, which happens to be a bit different from mine, outside of the prosecutor's office. And so it lends itself to fabulous roundtable discussions that represent a cross-section of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Mark. Candidate Celinda, a follow-up?
Well, during the last Charter Review Commission, it was actually Prosecutor Nichols who was very determined to not have the position changed from from partisan to nonpartisan. He issued a legal opinion that said it couldn't be changed. The Attorney General ultimately weighed in and said it could be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Celinda. Another question from the floor, please. Another question from the floor. Yes, Sherry.
So you have talked about the number of people in the prosecutor's office as having increased. The city of Port Angeles has been struggling with funds for court cases, and we have determined that it's not in the best interest for the city to duplicate the courtrooms, duplicate the judges, duplicate the record center, duplicate the personnel. And so we have cooperative agreements with the county. It's worked to the mutual benefit and partnership between the city and also City of Swimpton, the same thing, between the cities and the county. So that partnership is beneficial, and because the citizens of Port Angeles are also citizens of Clallam County. So that partnership has worked well for both the cities and working with. Do you plan on continuing that relationship, or are you concerned about cutting down employees and throwing things back to the cities? Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. So we'll have candidate Celinda go first. Would you stay working as the prosecutor for city business, or would you go back to being county only?
I would like to review the situation when I am in office to see how exactly it's all working. One of the things I do know is that while it's been to the financial benefit of the city, it has not been to the financial benefit of the county. And so that's something that I think needs to be addressed. And not necessarily by throwing it all back to the city, but to make sure that both entities are paying their fair share and the true costs of these duties. That is something that needs to be addressed. As I mentioned before, when these consolidations happened 3 years ago, I raised a lot of concerns about these numbers don't add up. But at that time, I got no traction. So when I'm in office, I would like to revisit that issue, but not necessarily. I want very much to work collaboratively with all of the entities that the prosecutor will deal with. And we want to move forward in good faith to serve all of the people of Clallam County. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Celinda. Candidate Mark.
So I really value the relationship that we have been able to establish with the city of Port Angeles and Splint. And I would note that we've extended the same opportunities to the city of Forks in the west end of the county as well. So everybody's being treated equally. in the same way. We're all in this together. When it comes to crime, when it comes to the operation of the courts, the direction in which society is heading, the failure to grant relief from the state level really places the burden upon us to try to become innovative in how we address funding resource needs. The commingling of resources, the consolidation of service makes infinitely good sense to me, not just in relation to municipal court prosecution services, but in relation perhaps to law enforcement and to other varieties of governmental service into the future. So I view this as a bit of a blueprint for hopefully some regionalization discussions that we'll see playing out in the years to come. No one said that this is going to be easy. No one entered into it with any illusion as to that regard. This is tough stuff. Even without the state legislature changing the law recently in relation to LFOs, which kind of threw a monkey wrench into the scenario that was unforeseen, it was tough beforehand to see if this was going to pencil out. I would tend to agree that I think for the cities of Sequim and Port Angeles, whose constituents are all county constituents, this makes great fiscal sense. You're also capable now of capping your legal liability in many respects. As to the county, what I've been told from the bean counters is that it's more or less a wash. We may well need to revisit how consolidation is structured moving forward. That's an exercise that I believe we're absolutely capable of, as between the city councils, the county board of commissioners, the prosecutor, the sheriff, as the case may be. These are collaborative folks who are interested in working together to maximize service for our community with a mind's eye towards focusing on public safety.
Thank you, Candidate Mark. And as we wrap up, each candidate will have 3 minutes to share their final thoughts. And since Candidate Mark went first on the introductions, we'll have Candidate Celinda go first on the wrap-up.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you here today. I'd be happy to come back at any time and talk about anything else you would like to discuss. As your county treasurer, I developed new internal controls and successfully turned over your $99.5 million in taxpayer reserve funds to my successor, restoring trust to the treasurer's office. As your prosecuting attorney, I promise to likewise restore trust to the prosecutor's office. To protect your rights, I will remain true to my oath of office, my oath as an attorney, and my oath as naturalized citizen to support and defend constitutional and statutory rule of law, and I will recruit deputies to provide professional, conflict-free, and above-board advice and representation to your other county public servants. To reduce your property tax burden, I will review the prosecutor's budget for savings and aggressively pursue collection of all amounts due under the county's interlocal and franchise contracts. I will work collaboratively but firmly with the Board of County Commissioners and their new county administrator to review the county's administration of its policies, the county's management of its personnel, and the county's relationship with the Washington County's risk pool. And to protect the public safety, I will carry my own caseload and prosecute offenses against the most vulnerable among us from the first day of the job. Justice, it isn't justice until it's equal. Justice is also just us. There's not going to be, I can assure you, a knight on some horse coming in when rights are being messed with. Our justice, our equal, our rights, it's just us. And the prosecuting attorney holds a key function in ensuring that all of our rights are being protected. Now, as your treasurer, Mark Nichols, in a legal opinion, stated that I am an ardent champion of the right of taxpayers to participate in the budget process. Mr. Nichols here is an ardent champion of loopholes, administrative loopholes. You should choose carefully. The next 4 years and your rights are going to depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candidate Celinda. And Candidate Mark, your closing statement.
It's been a real pleasure having the opportunity to share the morning with you. Let me talk a little bit about my vision for our community moving forward. I think it's important that when you consider your elected officials, the candidates for office, that you ask yourself the question, do they have a vision? And the answer to that is yes for me. I'm excited to be running for a second term, and I plan on focusing on 3 primary goals during my second term in office. The first of which involves aggressive prosecution of felony level offenders, specifically those who predate on the most vulnerable in our community. We've talked about children here today. We have a burgeoning senior population as well that I know is victimized largely in relation to financial crimes. There are abuse and neglect issues as well. And that's an area where, as a system, we can do better. And I'm devoted and committed to doing just that. In addition, I'm very interested in advancing discussion within county government and within our community at large, the establishment of a statutory mental health court. You don't need to look far to see the need. If you drive through downtown Port Angeles, Sequim, or Forks, you'll eventually wind up seeing a person who's behaving in a way that indicates that they are suffering from a mental health condition or disorder. These are people whose symptoms result in them breaking the law, getting directed into the criminal courts where we are ill-equipped to address their needs. Statutory mental health courts exist across the state. There's over a dozen jurisdictions that have seen fit to implement them, and they provide an opportunity to connect the resources of the criminal justice system with those of the mental health system in a way that allows us to address the underlying conditions, help people become diagnosed and treated, and start living productive lives where they're not recidivating, violating our laws, and clogging up our criminal court system. We're talking about helping people to turn their lives around and become productive members of our community. Last but not least, I'm excited about the opportunity to continue working on the coroner front to bring forward data sets and to help lead discussion of public health crisis issues across the county. Most notably, we've been discussing suicide of late. We're continuing to head in the absolute wrong direction. I believe that a sensible discussion regarding what's happening is in order. It's part of the solution, not part of the problem, to talk about these issues. And I look forward to doing that. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to serve the citizens of Clallam County during my first term. It's been my life's work, my pride and joy. I look forward to each day, notwithstanding how the previous one ended. This is work that's in my blood, I believe. Many people have asked, are you heading off to state government? What are your future aspirations? I like it right here in Clallam County, and I want to make our community better. So I ask for your support, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Nichols. Thank you. And thanks to PABA TV for filming, and now I'll turn it back over to Matt for some final announcements.
Thanks again, everybody, for coming. Thank you, candidates. Let's give them another hand, please. So next week, there you go. We are going to have Jim McIntyre and Steve Theringer in a forum. They're first. We plan on having a couple with both candidates because they're not engaged primary. They're going on to general election. You're all more than welcome to come back and bring good questions. Without further ado, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.